The first snowfall of winter brought more than just a chill to Maple Ridge Estates. It brought trouble in the form of Patricia Wilkins, HOA president and self-appointed snow patrol. I was shoveling my driveway when I saw her marching across her perfectly manicured lawn, clipboard in hand, and a scowl that could freeze water. "Mr. Bradley," she called out, her voice cutting through the crisp December air. "That snow needs to be completely cleared by noon according to HOA Regulation 15.3. I leaned on my shovel and tried to keep my voice level. "Good morning to you too, Patricia. I'm working on it, as you can see. My name is Thomas Bradley, but everyone calls me Tom." I'd moved to Maple Ridge in Burlington, Vermont 6 months ago after accepting a position as an engineering consultant for a renewable energy firm. The colonial-style home with its spacious yard had seemed perfect until I met the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association, led by the indomitable Patricia Wilkins. "Working on it isn't good enough," Patricia snapped, tapping her watch. "The bylaws clearly state all driveways must be completely clear within 4 hours of snowfall cessation. The snow stopped at 8 a.m. It's now 9:30. I gestured to the considerable progress I'd made. "I'll have it done well before noon." She made a note on her clipboard. "See that you do. And remember, snow must be piled in designated areas only, not on the street, not on the sidewalk, and certainly not anywhere near my property." With that parting shot, she turned and marched back to her house directly across from mine. Little did I know that this was just the opening salvo in what would become the winter war of Maple Ridge. The next snowfall came 3 days later, a heavy blanket that covered everything in sight. I woke early, determined to get my driveway cleared before Patricia could find anything to complain about. I'd barely started when I heard the mechanical growl of an engine. Peering through the falling snow, I spotted Patricia's gardener Manuel operating a small snowblower. He was methodically clearing her driveway, but what caught my attention was where the snow was going directly onto the portion of my driveway I just cleared. "Hey," I called out, trudging through the snow. "What are you doing?" Manuel looked up, his expression apologetic. "Sorry, sir, Mrs. Wilkins orders. She says this is the designated snow area for her property." "My driveway is not her designated snow area," I said, feeling my blood pressure rising despite the cold. "I just do what I'm told, sir," Manuel replied with a shrug. "She pays me, you know." I marched across the street, snow filling my boots, and rang Patricia's doorbell repeatedly. When she finally answered, she was wearing a plush bathrobe with PWA monogrammed on the pocket. "Patricia Wilkins, authority, I presumed." "Is there a problem, Mr. Bradley?" she asked, her voice syrupy with fake concern. "Yes, there's a problem. Your gardener is dumping your snow onto my freshly cleared driveway." Patricia smiled thinly. "I'm simply following the snow removal guidelines. Section 15.4 states that snow should be placed in areas that don't impede community roadways." "My driveway is not a community snow dump," I argued. "The bylaws don't specifically prohibit it," she countered. "Perhaps you should have read them more carefully before moving in." She closed the door before I could respond. I returned to my driveway, fuming, and spent the next hour re-clearing what Manuel had covered. As I worked, my neighbor to the left, an elderly man named Frank Rodriguez, came out to collect his newspaper. "I see you've met the Snow Queen," he called out, gesturing toward Patricia's house. I leaned on my shovel. "Is she always like this?" Frank laughed. "Patricia, she's been worse since they made her HOA president 3 years ago. Power went straight to her head. My advice, document everything." Taking Frank's advice to heart, I set up a security camera pointed at my driveway. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia's snow removal service, sometimes Manuel, sometimes a local company, deposited snow from her property onto mine 7 times. Each time I shoveled it back out, took photos, and sent emails to the HOA board documenting the issue. The responses were tepid at best. "The board will review your complaint at our next meeting. Please refer to Section 15.4 of the bylaws regarding snow placement." We suggest neighbors work together to find amicable solutions to winter maintenance issues. Meanwhile, the snow kept coming, and so did Patricia's vendetta. After a particularly heavy snowfall in mid-January, I woke to find nearly half my driveway buried under 3 feet of snow that had clearly been mechanically deposited there overnight. My security camera had captured the whole thing, a small front loader dumping Patricia's snow onto my property at 3 a.m. I spent 4 hours clearing it, missing an important virtual meeting in the process. That evening, I wrote yet another email to the HOA board, attaching the video evidence. The response came from Patricia herself. As HOA president, I've reviewed your complaint. The contractor may have misunderstood the property lines during night clearing. We'll issue a verbal warning. In the meantime, please note that your holiday lights should have been removed by January 15th per Regulation 22.7. A fine of $50 per day will be assessed until they are removed. I didn't have holiday lights up. I hadn't even been living here during the holidays. This was pure harassment. The next day, I consulted Nicole Saunders, a lawyer friend who specialized in property law. We met at a coffee shop downtown away from the prying eyes of Maple Ridge. This is clear harassment, Nicole said after reviewing my documentation. The HOA has no right to dump snow on your private property, regardless of what their bylaws say. So what can I do? I asked, warming my hands around my coffee mug. You have options. We could send a cease and desist letter, file a complaint with the city, or sue the HOA directly. Nicole tapped her pen against her notepad. But lawsuits are expensive and time-consuming. Sometimes the best approach is to find creative ways to work within their own rules. Creative how? Nicole smiled. HOAs live and die by their bylaws. Have you read them completely? All 50-plus pages. I winced. Not exactly. Do that first. Know their rules better than they do, then use them to your advantage. That night, I pored over the Maple Ridge HOA bylaws. Buried in Section 32.9, I found something interesting. All homeowners must maintain clear access to USPS-approved mailboxes. Obstructions that prevent mail delivery are subject to immediate remedy at the discretion of the HOA board. An idea began to form. The following week brought another snowstorm. As predicted, Patricia's snow removal service deposited a substantial pile on my driveway. This time I didn't immediately clear it. Instead, I waited until nightfall. At 10 p.m., when most of Maple Ridge was settling in for the night, I fired up the snowblower I'd purchased that afternoon. Methodically, I cleared my driveway, directing all the snow toward one target, Patricia's mailbox. By the time I finished, her mailbox was completely buried under a mountain of packed snow that she had dumped on my property in the first place. The next morning, I was enjoying my coffee by the front window when Patricia emerged from her house in a luxurious fur-trimmed coat. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw her mailbox, or rather, didn't see it. Her head swiveled toward my house, and I raised my mug in a mock toast before stepping away from the window. Within minutes, my doorbell was ringing furiously. I took my time answering. "Good morning, Patricia," I said pleasantly. "Beautiful day after the snow, isn't it?" Her face was mottled with rage. "You buried my mailbox." I adopted an expression of innocent confusion. Did I? I was just clearing my driveway of all the snow that somehow kept appearing there. I had to put it somewhere that wouldn't impede community roadways. I believe that's Section 15.4 of the bylaws. "This is vandalism," she sputtered. "I'll report you to the board." "That's your right," I replied calmly. "And while you're at it, you might want to check Section 32.9 about maintaining clear access to mailboxes. It seems someone is in violation." Patricia's eyes narrowed to slits. "This isn't over, Bradley." She stormed back to her house, pulling out her phone as she went. That afternoon, I received an email from the HOA board minus Patricia requesting a meeting to discuss the ongoing snow removal dispute. I agreed, suggesting we meet at the community center that weekend. The snow battles continued for the next 2 weeks. Each time Patricia had snow dumped on my driveway, I meticulously cleared it, depositing every flake around her mailbox. I was careful never to damage the mailbox itself. That would be a federal offense, but I made sure it was thoroughly inaccessible. Patricia escalated by having snow pushed against my garage door. I responded by creating an impressive snow sculpture around her prized decorative lamppost. She retaliated by having Manuel deposit snow on my front walkway. I cleared it directly onto the path between her driveway and front door. The neighbors began to take notice. Some found it amusing, others concerning. Frank started bringing me hot cocoa when I was out shoveling, while other HOA devotees gave me disapproving looks. One neighbor, Melanie Chen, stopped me while I was clearing snow one evening. "You know she's planning to fine you into oblivion, right?" Melanie warned. "Patricia's convinced half the board you're violating at least 3 different bylaws." "Let her try," I replied, more confident than I felt. "I've documented everything." The Saturday meeting at the community center included 5 HOA board members, Patricia and me. Patricia sat rigidly at one end of the table, a thick binder of evidence before her. I had my own documentation photos, videos, and a copy of the bylaws with relevant sections highlighted. Board member Theodore Wallace, a retired judge with a reputation for fairness, opened the meeting. "We're here to resolve the dispute between Mr. Bradley and Mrs. Wilkins regarding snow removal practices. Let's keep this civil and productive." Patricia jumped in first. "Mr. Bradley has been engaged in a campaign of harassment against me. He's deliberately buried my mailbox multiple times, preventing mail delivery and creating an eyesore in our prestigious community." She slid photos across the table. "This violates sections 12.3, 32.9, and 45.7 of our bylaws." I waited patiently until she finished her tirade. "Mr. Bradley, your response?" Theodore prompted. I opened my laptop. "I'd like to show you some footage from my security camera." I played videos showing Patricia's contractors dumping snow on my property on multiple occasions. "This has been happening consistently since December. I've sent numerous emails to the board, which I've also documented." I displayed the email thread. "The responses have been dismissive at best." Board member Deanne Fletcher leaned forward. "Patricia, did you authorize snow removal services to place snow on Mr. Bradley's property?" Patricia sniffed. "The snow removal company makes their own decisions about placement. I certainly never told them to put it specifically on his driveway." I played another clip, this one with audio. It clearly showed Patricia instructing Manuel. "Make sure you put it all on Bradley's side. He wants to be difficult. We'll give him something to shovel." The board members exchanged glances. "As for the mailbox," I continued, "I was simply returning snow to its rightful owner." "The bylaws don't specifically prohibit that, do they?" Theodore suppressed what looked suspiciously like a smile. "Mrs. Wilkins, it appears there's clear evidence that you directed snow to be deposited on Mr. Bradley's property, which is not a designated snow storage area according to our own guidelines." "This is ridiculous," Patricia exclaimed. "He's new here. He doesn't understand how things work in Maple Ridge." "What I understand," I said, keeping my voice level, "is that no HOA bylaw gives you the right to dump your snow on my private property. What I also understand is that you've been using your position to harass me rather than address legitimate concerns." Board member Eliza Patel, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up. "I move that we issue a formal warning to Mrs. Wilkins for misuse of HOA authority and direct her to cease directing snow onto Mr. Bradley's property immediately." "I second that motion," said board member Richard Coleman. "This is outrageous." Patricia stood up, gathering her materials. "I've led this HOA for 3 years. Maple Ridge has never looked better. Property values are up 15% since I took over." "Perhaps," Theodore said calmly, "but that doesn't give you the right to bully new residents or misuse HOA resources for personal vendettas." The vote was 4-1 in favor of the warning, with only Patricia's ally on the board, Victoria Mason, voting against. Additionally, they agreed to reimburse me for the cost of the snowblower I had purchased specifically to deal with the excess snow. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next major snowfall came 3 days later. I cleared my driveway early, making sure to deposit the snow well within my own property lines. When I returned from work that evening, I discovered that not only had snow been dumped on my driveway again, but someone had also splashed water over it, creating a dangerous sheet of ice. My security camera had malfunctioned or more likely been tampered with, so I had no footage of the incident. What I did have was a neighbor's testimony. Melanie had seen the whole thing from her home office window. It wasn't Manuel this time, she told me over the phone. Patricia hired a different company, and Tom, she was out there directing them herself, pointing exactly where to put the snow. After they left, she came back with what looked like a watering can. This had gone beyond petty HOA tyranny to something potentially dangerous. Someone could seriously injure themselves on that ice, me, a delivery person, or even an unsuspecting visitor. I called Nicole again. This has escalated, I explained. She's creating hazardous conditions on my property. Document everything, Nicole advised. Take photos. Get your neighbor's statement in writing, then call the police and file a report for reckless endangerment. This isn't an HOA matter anymore, it's a safety and potentially criminal issue. I followed Nicole's advice. Officer Marcus Jenkins arrived within the hour, surveying the icy driveway with a professional eye. This definitely wasn't natural freezing, he confirmed, testing the surface with his boot. Someone deliberately created this hazard. I showed him the photos I'd taken and played Melanie's voicemail describing what she'd seen. Officer Jenkins took detailed notes. "I'll need to speak with your neighbor and Mrs. Wilkins," he said. "In the meantime, put down salt or sand to make this safe and save the receipts for any expenses incurred." Patricia was apoplectic when Officer Jenkins knocked on her door. I couldn't hear the conversation from my house, but her wild gesticulations visible through her front window told the story. When the officer returned to his vehicle, he was shaking his head. "Mrs. Wilkins denies any involvement," he informed me. "Says it must have been neighborhood kids playing pranks. I'll be speaking with your witness next, but I've filed an initial report. If there's a pattern of behavior here, it could lead to charges." The police visit shook Patricia enough that, for almost 2 weeks, no snow appeared on my property despite several minor snowfalls. I began to hope the conflict had finally ended. Then came the blizzard. The Weather Service had been tracking it for days, a massive system that would dump potentially 2 feet of snow across northern Vermont. Schools and businesses announced closures. The governor advised people to stay home if possible. I stocked up on essentials and prepared to hunker down. The storm hit overnight with a vengeance, howling winds driving snow against windows and building drifts against doors. By morning, the world outside was a blank white canvas, still being painted by heavy snowfall. Looking out my front window, I could barely make out Patricia's house through the swirling snow. What I could see, however, was a large truck with a plow attachment in her driveway. Even during a state emergency, Patricia had managed to secure snow removal services. I watched as the plow cleared her driveway with efficient sweeps. Then, instead of moving on to another house, it turned directly toward my property. With deliberate precision, the driver pushed an enormous wall of snow across the street and directly into my driveway, building it higher and higher until it formed a barricade at least 6 feet tall. I grabbed my phone and began recording. The plow made 3 more passes, each time adding to the mountain of snow blocking my driveway completely. There would be no way I could clear this myself. It would require heavy equipment that I didn't have. When the plow finally departed, I bundled up and trudged through thigh-deep snow to inspect the damage. The barricade was even more imposing up close. I was effectively trapped, unable to get my car out if there were an emergency. I called the police again, but was informed that during the blizzard they were responding only to life-threatening emergencies. This didn't qualify, despite my argument about being blocked in. "Once the main roads are cleared, we'll try to send someone," the dispatcher promised. That left me with few options. I could wait for the storm to pass and then hire my own heavy equipment, which would be both expensive and potentially days away given how busy such services would be after a major blizzard. Or I could take matters into my own hands. I chose the latter. Among my camping gear was a small propane heater designed for ice fishing. It wouldn't melt the entire snow barrier, but it might help me create a pathway. I spent hours carefully melting channels through the snow wall, taking breaks to warm up inside when the cold became too intense. By evening, I had carved a narrow pedestrian path through the barricade. It wasn't wide enough for my car, but at least I wasn't completely trapped anymore. As I was finishing, Frank appeared beside me, leaning on a walking stick he was using to navigate the snow. "Patricia's gone too far this time," he said, surveying the massive snow wall. "The whole neighborhood's talking about it, even Victoria's saying she can't defend this." "Victoria?" "Patricia's ally on the board," Frank nodded. "She called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow, assuming the roads are cleared enough. Virtual if necessary. I think Patricia's finally crossed a line that even her friends can't ignore." The blizzard tapered off overnight. By morning, state and local plows had cleared the main roads, though side streets like ours remained largely untouched. I received an email from Theodore Wallace confirming an emergency HOA board meeting at 2 p.m. via video conference. At 10 a.m., a large front loader appeared on our street, not a municipal vehicle, but a private contractor. To my surprise, it headed straight for my driveway and began dismantling the snow barricade. The operator gave me a friendly wave when he saw me watching from my window. When he finished clearing my driveway more thoroughly than any other on the street, he came to my door. "Courtesy of the Maple Ridge HOA board," he explained, handing me a business card. "Mr. Wallace hired us directly, said to tell you they're very sorry about the inconvenience." The emergency board meeting that afternoon was unlike any HOA meeting I'd attended before. All 5 board members were present on the video call, along with about 20 other homeowners who had gotten wind of the situation. Patricia joined 5 minutes late, her camera angled oddly as if she didn't want to show her full face. Theodore called the meeting to order promptly. "We're here to address an incident that occurred during yesterday's blizzard involving Mrs. Wilkins and Mr. Bradley. This follows previous warnings issued to Mrs. Wilkins regarding snow removal practices." Victoria, Patricia's former ally, spoke next. "I've reviewed video evidence provided by Mr. Bradley and statements from 3 neighbors who witnessed the event. It appears that Mrs. Wilkins directed a private snow removal contractor to deliberately block Mr. Bradley's driveway with an excessive amount of snow during a state emergency. This action potentially endangered Mr. Bradley by preventing emergency vehicle access to his home." "That's completely false." Patricia interjected. "The plow company made their own decisions. I never instructed them to block anyone's driveway." I unmuted myself. "I have the invoice from the plow company," I said, sharing my screen to display the document I'd obtained just an hour earlier through Nicole's connections. It specifically notes special instructions from client to clear snow from 42 Maple Lane and deposit it at 45 Maple Lane, which is my address. Patricia's face went from red to white. That was a misunderstanding. I simply asked them to move the snow across the street." "Directly into my driveway during a state emergency," I pointed out, "creating a barricade that trapped me in my home." Theodore cleared his throat. "The board has already taken the liberty of hiring a service to clear Mr. Bradley's driveway at HOA expense. Now we need to determine what further action is warranted." What followed was a frank discussion about Patricia's behavior, not just toward me but apparently toward many residents. People unmuted to share stories of excessive fines, selective enforcement of bylaws, and petty retaliations against anyone who challenged her authority. Victoria moved to immediately remove Patricia as HOA president for gross misconduct and abuse of position. The motion was seconded by Richard and passed unanimously, with Patricia herself abstaining but protesting vehemently. "You can't do this. I've given years to this community," she shouted before abruptly leaving the meeting. The remaining board members apologized to me and assured me that steps would be taken to prevent further harassment. Theodore was appointed interim president until the next scheduled election. I thought that would finally be the end of the snow wars. Once again, I underestimated Patricia's dedication to vengeance. 2 days later, I awoke to find my front yard decorated with dozens of small flags, each bearing a citation for alleged bylaw violations. Unapproved mailbox color section 17.2, excessive snow on lawn section 15.6, unapproved window treatment section 23.9, improper trash can storage section 8.4. And on it went, with over 30 flags dotting my property like bizarre garden ornaments. Each flag included a fine amount totaling over $5,000. I documented the flags with photos and video before removing them. Then I called Theodore. "Patricia doesn't have the authority to issue these citations," he assured me after I described the situation. "She's no longer president, and even if she were, this isn't how violations are properly documented. Please ignore them." "Will she face any consequences for this?" I asked. "The board is meeting with our attorney tomorrow to discuss options," Theodore replied. This pattern of harassment may warrant legal action beyond just HOA measures. That evening, I returned home from work to find Patricia standing in my front yard with a camera, photographing my house from various angles. When she saw me, she didn't even pretend to be doing anything else. "Documenting violations," she called out. "The board may have been fooled by you, but I know a troublemaker when I see one." "You're trespassing, Patricia," I said calmly, taking out my phone to record the encounter. "Please leave my property immediately." "This is a community inspection," she insisted. "I have every right to be here." "Not anymore, you don't. You're not HOA president, and even if you were, you'd need to provide proper notice before an inspection. Please leave now or I'll call the police." "Go ahead," she challenged, continuing to take photos. "They won't do anything. This is HOA business." I dialed 911 without breaking eye contact. "Yes, I'd like to report a trespasser who is refusing to leave my property," I told the dispatcher. "She's been harassing me for months and was recently removed from her HOA position for misconduct." Patricia's smugness faltered when she realized I was actually following through. By the time I finished giving my address to the dispatcher, she was hurrying back across the street, muttering about seeing who has the last laugh. Officer Jenkins arrived 20 minutes later, and I showed him the video of Patricia on my property along with photos of the citation flags. He seemed increasingly concerned as I laid out the pattern of escalating behavior. "This goes beyond HOA disputes," he said. "This is harassment, potentially stalking. I'm going to speak with Mrs. Wilkins again, and this time I'll be making it clear that her actions could result in criminal charges if they continue." I watched from my window as Officer Jenkins spent nearly half an hour at Patricia's door. Her gestures became increasingly animated as the conversation progressed, until finally she slammed the door in his face. He returned to his cruiser, made some notes, and then came back to update me. "I've issued Mrs. Wilkins a formal warning for trespassing and harassment," he explained. "She's been advised not to enter your property or contact you directly. If she violates this, she could face arrest." The next day, Theodore called to inform me that the HOA board, on advice of their attorney, had voted to issue Patricia a cease and desist letter regarding all interactions with me. Additionally, they were implementing new bylaws to prevent abuse of power by board members in the future. We're also refunding all fines assessed against you during Patricia's presidency," he added. "Our review indicates they were punitive rather than corrective in nature." For almost a week, things were quiet. No snow appeared on my driveway despite a light snowfall. No citation flags materialized on my lawn. Patricia's curtains remained drawn, and I spotted her only occasionally retrieving her mail or getting into her car. Then came the final act in our winter drama. I was working from home when I heard the distinctive sound of a snowblower outside. Looking out my window, I saw Manuel clearing the light dusting of snow from Patricia's driveway. What happened next unfolded like a slow-motion disaster. Patricia emerged from her house and began gesturing emphatically, pointing first at Manuel's snowblower and then at my property. Manuel shook his head repeatedly, clearly refusing whatever she was asking. Their argument became heated, with Patricia's voice rising loud enough that I could hear fragments through my closed windows. "You work for me. Do as I say." Manuel removed his gloves and handed them to Patricia along with the snowblower controls. He said something I couldn't hear, then walked to his truck and drove away. Patricia stood there for a moment, then put on the gloves and started the snowblower herself. With determined steps, she began clearing her driveway, directing all the snow toward the street. Then, with a glance toward my house that I could only describe as malevolent, she guided the snowblower across the street directly onto my property. I grabbed my phone and began recording as Patricia systematically blew snow from her driveway onto mine, focusing particularly on the area around my mailbox. She worked with surprising efficiency for someone who likely had little experience operating such equipment. I was about to go outside to confront her when a police cruiser turned onto our street. Officer Jenkins on routine patrol. He slowed as he approached Patricia, who was too focused on her task to notice him until he activated his lights. The look of shock on her face when she realized she'd been caught in the act was almost comical. She immediately shut off the snowblower and began what appeared to be an animated explanation. Officer Jenkins calmly pointed to his dashboard camera, then to my house where I was visible in the window still recording. After a brief conversation, Officer Jenkins escorted Patricia back to her house. She went inside while he remained on her porch, speaking into his radio. Within minutes, a second police vehicle arrived. I received a call from Officer Jenkins asking me to provide my video footage and a statement. When I went outside to speak with him, he explained that given the prior warnings and the clear violation of those warnings, they were arresting Patricia for criminal harassment and trespassing. "We've been building a case file on Mrs. Wilkins based on multiple complaints from different residents," he explained. "Your situation appears to be part of a larger pattern of behavior that's been escalating over time." I watched in disbelief as Patricia was escorted from her house by a female officer, hands cuffed behind her back. She held her head high, but her face crumpled when she saw neighbors emerging from their homes to witness her humiliation. In the weeks that followed, the full extent of Patricia's HOA tyranny came to light. The district attorney's office found evidence that she had selectively enforced bylaws against personal enemies, embezzled small amounts from the HOA maintenance fund, and falsified meeting minutes to support her agenda. She ultimately agreed to a plea deal that included probation, community service, restitution to the HOA, and a restraining order preventing her from contacting me or serving on any HOA board for 5 years. The spring thaw brought more than just warmer weather to Maple Ridge. With Theodore leading a reformed HOA focused on community building rather than punitive enforcement, neighbors began to interact more positively. We held our first community picnic in years, and I found myself forming friendships with people who had been too intimidated by Patricia to socialize freely before. Patricia listed her house for sale in April and moved away before summer, reportedly to a condominium in Florida with no HOA. Manuel returned to maintain her property until it sold, and he eventually became my regular landscaper as well. As for me, I finally feel at home in Maple Ridge. My driveway remains clear of unwanted snow, and my mailbox stands proudly accessible at the end of it. Sometimes when it snows, I still think about that mountain of white that once trapped me in my home, and how it ultimately led to sweeping changes in our community. When the first snow falls this winter, I plan to be out early with my snowblower, helping elderly neighbors like Frank clear their driveways. Because that's what real community is about, not petty power plays and vindictive enforcement of rules, but neighbors looking out for each other through all seasons. And if anyone asks about the infamous snow wars of Maple Ridge, I'll tell them the moral of the story. Even the coldest of conflicts eventually thaw, and sometimes what gets buried in the snow is not just a mailbox, but an unjust system that needed to be swept away to make room for something better.